Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Clintstone Chapter 18 Ilarian Bandits, written by some guy named Ted. "I know," said Clint. I turned and looked at him, shocked. From the way Ch.18 had been talking, I thought that I was the only one who he told about the complexities of the SWERN Empire. Really, I thought he only told me. We were flying Susan on our way to wherever Clint had left the rest of his squad. He had shown up at our house a day early because he figured that I was recovered enough. I think he missed me. As soon as I got the chance, I told him everything Ch.18 told me. I had expected him to be shocked or confused. What I didn't expect was for him to be calm and unresponsive. This was big news. He should have had some reaction, even if it was just blinking. We could use this to our advantage, since we were supposed to go behind enemy lines to cause havoc. Getting some SWERN on our side would be very beneficial. They could provide us with shelter, information. When this all escalated into a full-blown war, it would be useful to have men behind lines at the very least. Clint could be intrigued by the thought, and not every SWERN was a war-mongering slaver. "Well, I didn't know exactly," Clint said, shrugging, "but no race is all bad. On Earth there were several regimes that were terrible, inhuman organizations. They were responsible for some of the darkest times in our history. From the outside they all looked evil and sick, but when you got inside, there were still those who held on to the good, who were nice, decent people, and that's not counting everyone who fought against those dark regimes." He looked over at me. "Are you following?" I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. What I'm getting at here is that I knew there had to be some SWERN who were decent, but for the longest time I didn't really want to accept it. It was just easier to hate them all. Easier to accept killing them that way. But I've started to accept that what happened on Earth, and I'm willing to accept that not all the SWERN are bad. He looked over at me and must have noticed the look of shock on my face. He should have, because only once before in my life had I stared slack-jawed at someone that was that for an entirely different reason. This was Clintstone, saying that there were SWERN that didn't want to kill. The very idea threatened to implode my brain. I knew there was Ch.18, but he was a special case. "Don't get me wrong," Clint said, his face getting that familiar dark look when he talked about death of Earth or the Empire. "I fully intend to kill every last SWERN involved with the death of Earth. Yeah, is going to pay dearly, and the Admiral will wish his race was never crawled out from the mud. But I'm not going to kill an entire race. I can't have another one on my conscience." I glanced at him, and I could see the regret and sorrow etched on his face. He still blamed himself for his people's death. He thought that it was his fault that I had managed to draw the SWERN there, and Clint had told the command that it had been all right if the group came down to talk. They had proceeded to murder everyone on the base, and then the planet. Clint closed his eyes and shook his head. "Enough of this dark stuff," he said, his voice picking up. "You've got some catching up to do." "What do you mean?" "Our new team, your second in command. You need to know who they are." I turned my head so fast that I could hear my neck click. I couldn't find the words to say, and so I just stared at Clint. My brow furrowed so tightly I thought I was going to melt together. He glanced at me, eyes flickering to the side. Pushing his chair, Clint rotated to face me. "What? Me? Second in command? I don't know anything about leading or being in charge of anything." "That makes the two of us, TEDx. Do you really think that I know what I'm doing?" I had always assumed that Clint did, in fact, know what he was doing. He always seemed so in control and had a natural air of command about him. People just did what he'd said, and he always worked out in the end. He had yet to lead me, or anyone else, wrong. "I'd assume so, yes," I said dryly. Clint barked out a short laugh. "Well, I have no idea what I'm doing. I just go from decision to decision, hoping none of them come back to bite me in the arse. Besides, you won't have too much to do. All you have to do is back me up and maybe lead an op or two on your own once in a while." I rolled my eyes. "Yes, all I have to do is lead an op by myself. I'm not qualified for that. I haven't had any training or experience. You're the one with the training and the experience. It makes sense for you to be the leader." Clint grunted and shook his head. I've got about as much experience as you. What do you say we just wing it together and maybe make sure that one doesn't screw up too badly?" I laughed. "All right, but you take the blame if we do mess up." "TEDx, if we mess up here, I doubt we'll be alive to take the blame." That put a sobering tone to the conversation. "So, who are we working with?" I asked to break the grim air. Clint's face lit up. "You know," he said, "I don't think I've seen a group of beings more suited to destruction and mayhem." He looked over at me, and I've looked in the mirror. I snorted. Clint gave a little chuckle as well. "There are 5, Louth, Harris, Vayana, Korkek, and Jua." The last one caught my attention. Jua? I thought that he was with Jem and the War Hunters. Clint shrugged and said, "I guess he requested a transfer to the bandits." "The what now?" I had not heard the name before. "Us," Clint replied. "The new unit. We've got an official military designation, part of the 3rd Special Forces Group, but we've nicknamed ourselves the Elorian Bandits. It was Harass who came up with the name. He based it on the location of our base and what our assignment is." "We have a base?" Clint nodded. "Yeah, an old pirate cave in the moon of Eloria 4. It's a nice place. It's got power, fresh water, and a nice view. But we're a little low on supplies, which is where we're going." I thought that we were going to where the rest of the team was. "We are. They're on Leah, near the minor swarm supply outpost. Hope you're ready, because we're going to see combat soon." I glanced out the front of the view screen and noticed a planet growing closer. I looked like I was going to see combat much sooner than I thought. I looked forward to it. Jua crept through the tall grass, his body low to the ground as his steps were careful. The supply post was a simple clutter of buildings with no walls or high towers to watch the attackers. Jua guessed that the swarm assumed that they would be safe here, on the backwater planet with no strategic value to speak of, safely inside the Empire-controlled space. There was no need to defend against attack if there were no attackers. This planet was almost uninhabited, and those who did live here were too afraid of the Empire to do anything. The swarm thought themselves safe on this planet, and they would be right, if not for the bandits. He shook his head at the thought. The Elorian Bandits, this group had named themselves. It was ridiculous. You could not name a group before they had even seen combat. The War Hunters had been named after a particularly difficult mission in the jungles of Jungun, and only by the general. But the Fenra, the Harass, had declared this group the Bandits, and it had stuck. Jua spotted the sworn sentry moving into the distance, crouching down, his chameleon suit providing enough camouflage to keep him hidden. Jua watched the sentry. Not that he needed to. The sentry was marching back and forth, clearly bored. He did not act as he should, examining every detail and observing everything. Had the sentry been the Jua in the old days, back when he was the Wraith, the commander would have hung the sentry up by his ankles and left him for hours. A poor sentry was a danger to everyone, and the commander had said, and he had been right. Jua pulled himself out of the past and focused on the present. He rubbed his wrist absently, feeling the ridges. He was confident enough that he skilled with the sentry's lack of it, to allow himself a simple movement. The sentry moved in a pattern, back and forth around the perimeter of the cluster of buildings, his eyes just glancing about. Jua had seen these like before. The one who convinced there was no danger and they didn't look for any. Jua had proved them fools many times before. Sneaking around on the other side of the supply post, Jua observed everything he could. He was to report back to the team after he determined the extent of the security and the layout of the various structures. After 20 minutes of careful inspection, Jua had identified the largest building as a warehouse, used to storage of food and other general supplies. The smaller but much sturdier constructed building next to it was the armory. A third low-lying building was the barracks. Jua could see several swarm moving inside. The fourth and last building was the mess and leisure hall. There seemed to be a fair number of swarm wandering the outpost, but only the one seemed to be on any form of security duty. From what Jua could see, perhaps 30 swarm soldiers called the place home. There may be more, but the size of the barracks only indicated around 30. His task done, it was time for him to return to the rest of the team. After one last glance at the inept sentry, G.W.R.E. backed away carefully and made his way towards the temporary camp and the team had set up while waiting for Clint and TEDx. He was not sure what he thought of Clint leading the team. On one hand, Clint was very good at causing mayhem and destruction, which was why the bandits had been created in the first place. But on the other, Clint was reckless and rushed into things much too fast. G.W.R.E. liked to think things through before acting. Patience and precision got it being much further than in the long run them being brash, impulsive action. Fire burned, meat tasted good, and patience paid off. G.W.R.E. glanced over his shoulder and noticed the sworn outpost had faded from view, hidden by the distance and tall grass. That was another sign that the swarm's incompetence. The fact that they had left the grass standing anywhere within 3 miles of the outpost. Tall grass allowed for enemies to sneak up unseen and undetected. This was a good thing if you were the enemy, but it was not so good if you were the ones defending. But G.W.R.E. did not concern himself with that. If the swarm wanted to help G.W.R.E. kill them, that was all right by him. The grove of trees where the bandits had made their camp appeared in the horizon. Deactivating his chameleon suit, returning to the light grey color, G.W.R.E. stood at his full height and approached the camp, making sure to be as obvious as possible. Unlike the swarm, the bandits did have a good sentry. Korkak waved at G.W.R.E., his furred body hidden in the leafy boughs. If G.W.R.E. had not known of the Quantem was up there, he wouldn't have seen him. Well, G.W.R.E. would have, but no one else would have. As soon as he waved, Korkak turned his gaze back across the plains, watching carefully for any sign of trouble. He should have been watching the camp. As G.W.R.E. walked into the center of the grove, the branches forming a thick roof that provided a shaded space for the rest of the bandits, Harass lounged against the tree, cleaning his pistols for the 5th time that G.W.R.E. had seen. Louth was pacing around the space, having hands moving in strange patterns. The Gurk was always moving. In the last 6 days, G.W.R.E. had only seen him stop moving to sleep. He found it very annoying. His gaze fell on the last of the bandits. Vienna sat against a tree on the opposite side from Harass, her eyes closed, looking for all the world asleep. But G.W.R.E. knew that she wasn't. He could see the faint flicks of her ears that told him that she was listening to everything going on around her, and the relaxed way she was sitting was not the relaxed way of sleep, but that of a coiled spring. Her deep brown eyes opened and looked into his. A faint smile touched her lips, and he looked away hurriedly. It was not that she scared him, but rather the opposite. She intrigued him. He had never seen a Raccoon in combat, much less a female. It was not an uncommon sight to see female fighters, but G.W.R.E. did not think that Vaya looked like a fighter. She was not big, or scary, or tough-looking. What she was smart and fast. She deserved a place in this team, and she had only had to prove it once. Louth had taken it upon himself to question the fighting ability of a woman who looked like she should be on the arm of some rich diplomat, not on the battlefield. In response, she had punched him in the stomach, but it had not been intended to damage, only to enrage. Clint had watched with a calm air, letting them solve their own problems. G.W.R.E. had assumed that that was what he was doing. It was what G.W.R.E. would have done. If Clint had stepped in and defended Vienna, it would have been seen as a sign of weakness on Vienna's part. That would have undermined her position on the team, and there would be questions as to her placement here. Instead, Clint had sat by and watched as Vienna utterly devastated Louth. In a flurry of blows too fast to follow, she blew past Louth's defenses and drove him to the ground. When he tried to stand, she grabbed a pistol from Harass's belt and held it to his face. That was the end of that. Vienna was accepted into the team without question. G.W.R.E. had never seen anything like it, hence his intrigue. G.W.R.E., good, you're back. We've got a plan to make. G.W.R.E. watched as Clint Stone walked out of the shadows. For such a large being, he could hide well, and G.W.R.E. should have noticed him, but he had been distracted by Vienna. This was a problem. G.W.R.E. had never got distracted. Fire burned, meat tasted good, and G.W.R.E. was focused. TEDx walked out beside him, looking surprisingly well for a being who should have died 6 times over. When G.W.R.E. had heard that story, he had not believed it at first. Then he remembered the way the Jahan had been during the liberation of Berea. "Did you get a look out at the layout?" Clint asked, and Dewar nodded. He walked over to the center of the shaded space and drew his knife. As soon as Clint started speaking, the rest of the bandits had gathered in a circle around him. Using short, efficient strokes, Dewar drew out a rough outline of the supply post. He pointed out each building in turn. "Barracks," he said. "Armory, warehouse, mess." He used as few words as necessary. What was the point of using dozens of words when you could get your point across in 4? "How many soldiers?" TEDx asked. 30, maybe 40. Clint rubbed his chin, nodding. "I think this will be a straightforward mission. Does everyone here have IPDM suits?" A chorus of yeses and sirs followed that. Dewar simply nodded. When Clint had first taken them to the tailors, the team had been skeptical. After all, what could a cloth do against plasma? They had been pacified when Clint had demonstrated what the suits could do. Dewar was the only one not surprised by the capabilities of the deceptively light cloth. He had worn one on Berea, and it had saved his life more than once. On the battlefield, these would be a major tipping point. "I told you all, there is no need to call me sir. Captain Stone or just Captain is fine." Dewar did not understand that sir was shorter word, and therefore required less time to speak, making it less of a waste. He did not plan on calling Clint either of those titles. He did not intend to speak much at all. "All right, here's what we're going to do. Seeing as there are only a few soldiers, we might as well try a simple head-on attack. We'll split into groups and attack from different directions. I want all of the swarm dead this time. In the future, we'll leave some alive as messengers, but I want this place wiped from existence." Clint looked around at the group surrounding him. "Roth and Korkek, you'll attack from the north. Harass and Vienna, you'll attack from the east. TEDx Dewar, attack from the south. I'll cover the west. Just march through the post and kill every swarm you see. Avoid damaging the supplies, because that's what we're here to get. Get into position and wait for my signal. You'll know when you see it. Good luck." The inept sentry marched back and forth across his path. Dewar could see the shallow trench showing where the sentry had passed, thousands of times. TEDx stood beside him, crouching in the tall grass. He made a possible attempt at hiding, enough to hide from the sentry, but Dewar would have seen him in seconds. A loud crack sounded across the plain, and Dewar tensed in preparation for the attack. TEDx gripped his arm and shook his head. So that was not the signal. Indeed, Dewar could see that the sound had come from within the camp, just outside the armory. A swarm soldier had dropped a large metal crate on the steps, and that was the source of the noise. Dewar could see the soldiers' commanding officers scolding him from here. When was the signal going to come? They had been in this place for the last 5 minutes, plenty of time for the rest of the team to position themselves. The officer continued to berate the soldier. A flash of light appeared from the side and passed through the officer's chest. He dropped to the ground, dead, a faint wisp of smoke curling above his body. The soldier had been yelling and dropped a second later, before he even had time to register the fact that he was under attack. That was the signal. TEDx leapt up from his position and fired at the inept sentry. He missed, but the shots continued past and hit the barracks window, shattering them. Dewar fired at his second crouch position as the sentry dropped. Dewar had been aiming at the sentry since they had gotten into the position. It was showed the patience paid off. TEDx let out a wordless battle cry and charged at the building. Weapon blazing, he dropped several swarm before they could even fire and flattened himself against the wall of the barracks. Dewar stayed in his hidden position and watched the windows carefully. A swarm's head popped up, looking for the source of the plasma fire, and Dewar pulled the trigger, the plasma whispering as it left the barrel. The swarm dropped back down, smoke rising from where it had been. Scanning the area in front of him, Dewar could see no more swarm. Still, he waited a few more seconds before he ventured out into the open. TEDx was making his way down the wall, gun at the ready. Sounds of plasma fire and screams and pain came from the other side of the barracks, coming from the swarm as the rest of the bandits attacked them. Dewar broke from the cover and raced to the other side of the barracks. There were times for haste, such as when you were in the middle of killing swarm. Dewar's tattoo itched on his cheek, but he ignored it. Pushing his back against the wall, Dewar poked his head around the wall. He could see no immediate danger, and he slid around the corner, gun at the ready. The louder screams were coming from the west, where Clint was attacking from. No surprise there. Dewar reached the front of the walled barracks and looked around the corner, catching Teddix doing the same. Teddix motioned to the front door, mimicking opening it and filling the room with fire. Dewar nodded. It was a good plan, efficient and simple with no waste. Teddix crept up to the door and Dewar kept an eye on the space between the barracks and the mess hall, watching to make sure that no swarms snuck up on them. None did. The screams had ceased in the west. Dewar had assumed that Teddix had finished with the swarm there. Teddix reached for the door and Dewar followed him. As soon as Dewar was level with him, Teddix stood and swung the door open. He burst into the room, guns blazing. Dewar stepped in behind him and filled the left side of the room with fire. There were 5 soldiers in the barracks and they all died before they had a chance to scream. Teddix bent and looked out the window. Dewar did the same. He could see no movement outside and there was no sound either. It must be over. That was confirmed by Clint Stone walking from behind the mess hall, his arms waving over his head. "It's over, they're dead," he called. Teddix lowered his gun and thumped down the steps, drawing even with Clint. Dewar followed. Clint waited in the center of the buildings as the rest of the bandits gathered. None of them looked injured in the slightest. Several had burn marks on their clothes, but the suits had prevented the bolts from penetrating their flesh. "I think that went well," Clint said. "Any problems?" "No, Captain," said Louth. The rest nodded. Clint clapped hands together. "Excellent. Let's see what we've got here." He strode over to the armory and pulled the door. It did not open. Clint raised a finger and a blue blade erupted, glowing with plasma. Dewar watched it with interest. He had known Clint had a metal hand, but he had not known that he had extras. The rest of the bandits seemed surprised at this new development as well. Teddix did not seem fazed. He had been with Clint forever. Undoubtedly he knew everything that there was to know about Clint Stone. The blue blade cut through the door with ease. Clint stepped back and let it fall with a thump to the dirt. Inside the armory, Dewar could see rows of guns, rockets, explosives, and a variety of other military hardware. The rest of the team noticed as well. Vienna whistled. "Is that a pallet of CGS-43s? Damn. How much are we taking, Captain?" "All of it. I'm going to bring Susan around and we're going to load it up, and all the weapons as much food as we can. If we're going to cause some damage, you can never have enough explosives." Vienna grinned. "You don't have to tell me twice." It took them an hour to load all the weapons and the food. There was not a single foot of spare space left in Susan when they were done. Crates, boxes were stacked on the floor to ceiling. It didn't take nearly as long to unload it into the cave that the bandits were using as their base. Clint gathered them in the main chamber. When they had finished, he passed around a number of glasses. "It's not alcohol, but I'd like to give a toast. Raise your glasses," he said, realizing that they had no idea what a toast was. Dewar raised his glass. "To a job well done and to battles yet to come. May they be clean and quick as this one. To the first strike in our personal war on the Empire." Clint drank. The bandits followed suit. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.